Hello, everybody, and welcome to Forever Sports. And the Sharks are casting their net wide and far to find their next replacement for John Plumtree, and have included conversations with former director of rugby Jake White, who apparently has been reached out to by the Sharks and has met with senior figures, although at this stage not necessarily in line to take over, but potentially could be a candidate for the Sharks job long term. And so I thought an interesting time to be able to speak about where the Sharks are, maybe kind of what they need and how they get a franchise with the best squad on paper in the country to perform to the equivalent level. Because at the moment, the Sharks are just nowhere, absolutely nowhere. And when you look at the names on their payroll, for example, they shouldn't be. They should be dominating South African rugby. They should be really competitive in the URC. They should be Champions Cup candidates, really, if you look at the squad. And, we've had confirmation last week that John Plumtree has officially stepped aside from his role as head coach, but also is not leaving the union just yet. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. Before we do, please do smash a like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. So a month ago, as we head into the Autumn Nation series, we got a official release from the Sharks that they had reviewed their coaching structures and decided that John Plumtree would not continue as head coach beyond the end of the season, and that a search for a new head coach was underway. At the time, it said that John Plumtree would continue as head coach in his role with his assistants as per usual up until the end of the season. However, since then, things have changed, and they confirmed that John Plumtree has officially stepped aside from his role. He has still got a contract at the Sharks. He's still under contract, and he is actually still looking to try and see out that contract and remain in the Durban franchise. Spoke about the fact that Durban means so much to him. One of his kids was born here, his wife is South African, and that he really wants to stay in Durban and he wants to stay at the Sharks, but obviously will not be involved long term within the Sharks, main senior squad coaching setup. So he is currently having a conversation with Malcolm Azati about where they might put him to use. In the interim, JP Peterson has stepped in as the interim head coach. He did coach the Currie Cup side, has won a Currie Cup there. Very inexperienced coach from a this kind of level. His first real sort of big job of a year, and he's going to have a decent run. He's going to have 4 or 5 months, but I do think it's a broken union. So I do think it's a bit of a poison chalice, and I think I'll be surprised if he manages to really get the Sharks side operating at the level that people expect. And maybe it might be an audition. It could be an audition really for him to sort of see, is he potentially ready? What does he bring to the table, for example? Is he a potential option moving forward? And kind of where do the Sharks stand with regards to the type of coach that they want moving forward? And on that note, they have then reached out to Jake White. Now, Jake White served as director of rugby just over a decade ago at the Sharks after his time with the Springbok sort of came to an end. And apparently they sort of spoke to him about not so much about the Sharks' job, but more about kind of where the Sharks need to go. So a source told Report that Jake is not currently an option as head coach. He's an experienced coach who wants to help us get back on track. But he didn't ask about the job, and the Sharks didn't offer it. So apparently sort of more on a consulting basis, basically maybe sort of speaking to him and saying, right, as a director of rugby, kind of where do you think we need to go? What sort of coach should we be looking at? What sort of structures should we be looking at? How do we get it right with regards to our very big Springbok roster of players who are not always available? And how do they kind of prioritize their resources and weigh up their resources to be competitive throughout the season? Now, I personally think that, somebody like a Jimmy Stonehouse needs to be looked at with a lot of seriousness. Because I think at the moment, and this is why, people are talking about maybe Jake White could be an option. And in many ways, I think is why it couldn't become an option, is it's man management. At the end of the day, Sharks do not have a talent problem. Sharks do not have a pedigree problem. They've got the players. They've got the resources. It's now about making sure that you find a way to put those resources together and to play at a high standard. And, there's two sides to that. First of all, there is a tactical side. There is making sure that you've got the right game plan. You make sure that you're using your resources, that you've got the right players in the right positions, being able to adapt during the game, your substitutions, the way you use your bench, the type of rugby you want to play. That needs to make sure that you sort of tailor-made that game plan to the squad you have, rather than just building a squad and then going, all right, cool, well, what kind of do we do? That's what they've done. They've basically built a squad and now trying to sort of play a certain way, rather than saying, right, this is how you want to play. Now we need to go and find the right players. And that's kind of the problem with the sort of Galacticos approach, is the fact that often you look at the caliber of player rather than the style of the player. And that's where recruitment is so crucial. You've got to decide we want to play in a certain way. And that might need, very quick backline players. It might need big backline players. You might need a really mobile pack with a good skill set versus a really big pack. You look at La Rochelle, and they've got a massive pack, for example, that they play off the back of. And, different squads are built up in different ways. And I think that's kind of the problem is the Sharks have not had a playing identity for many years. I don't think that everyone's been able to look at the Sharks and say, this is how they play, which you've been able to do at the Bulls, for example, at the Stormers, even at the Lions. And I think that's quite interesting. The fact that I think the reason the Lions are currently doing better than the Sharks is that although they don't have the players, even the coaching superstars, for example, they do have somewhat of an identity. They do have a way of playing. They do have a sort of style of play. And they've got some players who sort of fit that mold. And that's why we've seen the Lions at times show they are can sort of punch above their weight. Unfortunately, the depth kind of catches up to them consistently, and that's where they can struggle for consistency itself, be given the fact that they don't have the kind of depth the Sharks have. But I think Sharks lack an identity, and I think that somebody like a Jimmy Stonehouse, for example, is the right type of personality because he manages the players very well. He plays the man, not the game necessarily. And I think that he's the right kind of person that could hopefully try and unite a change room like that, get them all and under his wing, and everybody aligned, and then say, right, this is how we're going to play, and be able to sort of play in that way. Because a lot of this now in this kind of job is about managing egos, and you talk about the fact that Springbok players don't have egos, but all sportsmen have egos. And when you play at the highest level, for example, you do have an elevated sense of self-importance because you've been there, you've done that, so an Eben Etzebeth, Sia Khaleesi, a Bongi Manambi, an Oxen Chair, they'll have, they're in the best setup in the world from a Springbok point of view. So they have those sort of standards. If you don't then reach those standards, or you're not hitting those similar standards as a coach, there will be criticism, and they will sit there feeling like, this is not at a level that it should be. And the way we're playing is not a level that we should be, the way we're training, for example. So you've got to make sure that you've got the right personality in the change room to be able to deal with these very big profile players. And you've also, got to be able to make sure you can take them on, for example, to a certain degree and challenge them as well, but in a way that gets them behind you. So I think that you've got to really find a good man manager. You've got to find someone that's going to really bring the change room together and get them all playing under a banner. And then you've got to make sure they've got the right sort of coaching staff and the background to then be able to get the best of them on the field. You've got some of the best players in the world in that franchise. You've got an Oxen Chair who was nominated for World Player of the Year and was in the dream team over there. Thomas Tutoy is coming back to the Sharks. You've got Andre Estes, and look at the season he has. You've got an Eben Etzebeth, you've got a Sia Khaleesi, you've got some phenomenal talent in that Sharks side. An Apele Lefasi, for example, a Maxima Pimpi, etc. The list always goes on. You've got Kanya Arms, etc. How are we getting the best out of them? And that's where I think that it's so important that they get this coaching job right. And I think it's a good thing that they're going to reach out to Jake White and get different opinions and kind of understand, right, well, from a rugby point of view, what do we need? Because I think that's kind of the problem is that they've looked at big names and not maybe sort of had enough conversations with people on the ground who are, in and around the coaching space right now. And Jake White obviously didn't work out for him at the Bulls in the end, but he had some decent amount of success. And he'll be able to give you an input about, right, well, this is what the current players are like. This is maybe where I struggle. This is maybe where new coaches are working. And I look at Don Dobson, for example, and the way the Stormers are playing. He plays the player. He's such a character, charismatic sort of coach that he gets the players on side. He can manage a Sasha, a Marnie, a Damian Willems, to the likes of that, get everybody together and get the best out of them. And we are seeing some of the best rugby that the Stormers have played in a while. This season is a reason they're undefeated across all competitions. They've not lost a game this season. And, he's not got the coaching pedigree that a Jake White had, for example. Even a John Plumtree, to a certain degree, in terms of the amount of experience and the types of jobs he's had previously. He's come through the ranks of UCT. But look at the success he's having because of the culture that he's built at the Stormers. And I think the Sharks, for me, it was a very almost like a PR type of stunt. They put rocks in a little glass or clear like bowl type of thing, and they all say we see color and we're very transformed, and we want to sort of culturally we're also different cultures that all come together. But to be honest, I think that they've done it quite superficially. They kind of talk about it and they make quite a big deal about it. And it's very much in the front of social media and the media. And they have this narrative they try and push. But I don't think they've managed to actually implement that culture properly to a point where you're starting to see it on the field. And I think that's where the Stormers, for example, are getting it right. They've got a very good team culture. They don't necessarily show it as much or advertise as much, but there is a good culture in the Stormers at the moment. I think, to be honest, I think there seems to be quite a big culture in the lines. Quite interesting listening to, I want to say it was JC Pretorius, and he spoke about the fact that they are playing for Ivan from Norway when he's under pressure. They said, no, we need to play for our coach. We need to back up our coaches. And I thought that was quite a defining moment, actually. The fact that people spoke about that there was potentially issues within the change room. And a week after that, one of the players came out and said, that's absolute nonsense. We are playing for him. We need to go out because we believe in him. He believes in us and we're playing for him. And you kind of need to get that situation where the players play for the coach, you know, and you've got that loyalty and that sense of determination, because that's what Rassie Erasmus has done so well. You got the template there, Rassie. And John Thompson spoke about the fact that he's taken a lot from Rassie Erasmus, and he's spoken to Rassie Erasmus about how you kind of implement that kind of team culture. Because team culture is so important at the highest level. You know, it's the best team cultures really that often to go on to get lots and lots of success. And I think that's where the Sharks need to start. Is it needs to be a dramatic shift in culture towards something that is more positive and gets the best out of the different players, and then start worrying about, you know, oh, we're doing this and we're doing that initiative, etc., etc. Get the results going on the field, get that team culture sorted, and I think a lot of things will happen. So Jake White, this is not part of the conversation, but definitely part of the giving a bit of feedback with regards to who the next coach is. So my question is, who would you like to see as the next head coach? Let me know down in the comments below. Smash the like on the video, subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve. I'll chat to you soon.